Well, good morning. We meet again. It's a Monday and it's quite early today. It's quite early today because I couldn't wait to get here for some reason. You know what I mean? Couldn't wait to get here. And the reason is the topic that I have today is the reason why I was really in a rush to get here. Get here. What am I even talking about? Getting here, talking to my phone. uh, it's a strange discipline. It's a strange discipline. But I tell you what, it keeps me from, because I got a lot of free time to myself at the moment. And for me, in my past, as I've talked about my healing journey and one of the things that I'm learning about, in my past, I've collapsed into abstraction within. What I mean by that is that solitude is a beautiful and true thing that we can all experience, but few do on the one hand. And at the same time, for me personally, I got to be careful about that because of the way I was stuck. Falling into isolation just lent me to an endless abstracted intellectualization, just endless thinking, which was based on a sealed off emotionality that kept me stuck. So being alone, it was just more of the same. And worse so, because I would plunge into it deeply and just dissolve into an arid abstraction. The thing is that when you reach your real place inside, it is also abstract, truly. Touching your energy inside is abstract because it's got nothing to do with the outer world, the world of material, the world of the senses and whatnot. Even though the world of the senses leads you to it, it is not reducible to the outside world. And in fact, true being is something that happens when you're aware. You're just slightly disconnected from the world around you. The thing is that leads then to the next pitfall is the world of thoughts, because they become imprisoning inside themselves. And so that was for me the deviltry of the prison that I was in, the prison of my own mind, as I've talked about exclusively and extensively here. The reason why this is a discipline to me is because in talking to you about it, I can't just collapse inside myself. There's a certain responsibility I feel. Even though I'm just sitting in a room talking to my phone, it's that on the other side of the phone, I know that there's a multitude of unknown people. And that's the nature of discipline for me, is to be in the presence of the unknown and the unknowable, and then to just let happen what happens. So I was in a rush to get here today because of the topic that I want to talk about today, which is kind of like the intent that I'm exploring here. And ultimately, it's got one word. It's called community. 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 That's the world that we live in. The world as social beings which nurtures us and holds us, even though solitude is a place from which we emerge into community, and solitude is the place from which we retreat from community back into ourselves, right? The question then in community is what do we have in common, right? I'm laughing already because, I've lived most of my life practicing Carlos Castaneda's attributes of warriorhood and being a sorcerer, whatever that means. I haven't even talked about being a sorcerer. I haven't talked about it because it's something that arises out of silence, and so that silence, that stillness I've been talking about, getting that still place within. It's like where does community fit into that, right? So anyway, the reason I'm talking about this is because I've spent quite a while online because I live in Victoria. It's a small town in the west of Canada. And I don't know where to find people who are interested in the same thing as me. I don't know. Sometimes I'll bring it up as a topic. People generally not interested in spirituality as a topic. People are not generally interested in like energy, in dreaming, in what life is about. The way that I'm interested in it, I find there's not a lot of like connections there. You know, when I play music and I'm just immolated in energy and the pure delight of music, I'm just listening and being and expressing. I'm in pure flow state. I find that connections are easy and that people do enjoy that, and that we do have, I do have connections with people in that moment, right? But, and also I'm guided by, a few times ago I talked about him. I call him my Russian friend. He's this Hindu monk, basically. He's Russian. He lives in Russia somewhere. He's got a website called Meditation Steps, and he does a lot of videos. And I mean, he reminds me of a friend of mine and my friend's dad, who I knew when I was younger. He's got the beautiful knowledge of the Vedic system, and I don't know, I'm quite fond of him. He seems like a guy I could be friends with. However, I'm not in his system, so constantly we'd be in a dialogue of like, why am I not doing kirtan? Why am I not doing meditation or mantras the way he looks at it? Why is my diet not good enough from his perspective? I mean, that is what a dialogue is with someone who practices a religious system, you know? And equally, you can't be friends with a Christian, you know what I mean? Like, it's impossible. I've been friends with a couple of Christians, and it always leads to the same place. If you don't believe the same thing as your Christian friend does, then he thinks he's going to hell. And so he needs to proselytize to you, because in his ideology, he's projected, his goodness, his love, his value, his flow state, his energy being. It's all been objectified in an idea system. And so you need to accommodate that externalized idea system, or he's threatened. I mean, that's what it means to be in a religious system, is that your entire inner process has been objectified out there. And so the world of other people and the world of objects and matter becomes an extension of your religious system. And if others do not correspond to your ideas, then you're threatened and you need to attack them. Attack in the form of ministry, in the form of proselytization. And it's happened to me recently with I don't know if we're friends anymore, but I still feel friendly feelings. And I think he feels friendly feelings towards me. However, we're on the other side of the fence of ideology. And that makes for strange bedfellows, because ideology is interesting. It's the biggest nothing, and yet it's what divides our world, And so here I am, I'm talking about Christianity. I threw Carlos Castaneda's name out. I've already talked about now my Vedic friend who I watch online, and I can already recognize the kind of conversation that we would have, a conversation dissonance, I should say, in terms of, his own practice and his own religious system, even though I get a lot of wisdom listening to him, right? And then there's my Christian friend, Christian friends, as far as you can be friends with a Christian, because their friendship is secondary to your agreement to their system. I mean, that's what it comes down to in the end. And of course, as I've said before, Christianity is the ideology of colonialism. And I mean, all you got to do if you want to know a Christian friend is look at colonialism and see exactly what that ideology is all about. I am not talking about Jesus. Jesus is a beautiful teacher. He shows the way of devotion, and I personally practice Jesus's way because I practice loving devotion in my life. However, that is not to say I agree with any of the doctrine, any of the ideology, any of the dogma, and at that point, I separate paths and just look with humor at the kind of things that they talk about and get involved in, So community, right? Each, Vedic community, meditation community, Buddhist community, it's all about that system. Christian community is all about that system, right? And so, a lot of my life, I've been practicing Carlos Castaneda, never been able to talk to anyone about it. ever. I've never talked to anybody except you, strangers on the internet, about Carlos Castaneda and the things that I've learned from him, from his system. And I mean, I know, plenty of times in my life, I should have gone down to LA and gone to a Tensegrity meeting or something like that, just to talk to people about it, But that never opened up for me, right? But now that we got the internet, I can virtually see what a lot of Castaneda people are about. And I've got to say, I mean, it just makes me laugh, whenever I do a search about Castaneda on any topic that I'm interested in, it's just a bunch of talking heads. I'm a talking head right now. And the talking heads are the strangest people talking about the strangest things. I don't know, these Castaneda people, their eyes are they're just a little too staring. And their smiles are just a little too, yes, the dreaming position or whatever. Am I making fun of people here? I mean, and I'm sorry that I am. I'm sorry to all the genuine practitioners of Carlos Castaneda's Way of the Warrior that I'm laughing at you, because I'm laughing at myself. I am one of you. And yet I feel no community there. I always open these videos hoping that I'm going to feel a resonance with something that someone's talking about. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. I don't want to say any names because I don't want to get into a dialogue of like agreement or disagreement. I don't, because I don't wish anyone ill. I want everyone to be the absolute flourishing of their aliveness. That is what I think life is about. And that's what I'm about here. I just notice that as I try to find community, and when I'm looking at these Carlos Castaneda posts, that I don't learn anything and I don't feel any kinship with these people. And if anything, I just notice the differences and the dissonances, Maybe it would be different if we met in the pub. Although, would they meet in the pub? Because that's drinking, and therefore, it's against the spiritual path. So it's like, I'm not a huge drinker. I do enjoy the pub. What can I tell you? You know what I mean? Like I'm a Gaelic man. I love singing. I love drinking. I love joking around. And that is part of my aliveness. And so without it, I don't know really what I'm about, And and so community, I don't know what the fuck to say to you about community, because I'm at a loss myself about it. You know what I mean? I'm at a loss. I haven't really noticed anyone online talking about anything to do with Castaneda that's been anything other than bizarre and dispiriting, And yet the wisdom that I feel inside myself from having learned what I have, about being a warrior, or let's say about the assemblage point. The assemblage point is this idea. I'm just leaping right in here because, assemblage point is a place where people start talking about the assemblage point on the internet, and it's like, it just gets bizarre. People got their own guided meditations, It's the assemblage point is associated with something called the Plait. The Plait is Plait, and it's like this energy braid that comes out of the back of you. I mean, visualize the Plait, visualize the assemblage point. I don't know what to say about all that, you know what I mean? But for me, the feeling of assemblage point is important, because all the work that I ever did with Castaneda, all the sort of, if I'm going to use assemblage point language, all the small shifts of assemblage point I managed to make, in the ways that I was living my life and striving and seeking for truth. In the end of the day, I couldn't move that assemblage point. I couldn't move it because my assemblage point, if I'm going to use that language, was fixed where I'd been traumatized repeatedly in my youth, and which had been set up in such a rigid shell that I couldn't break it. You know what I mean? And finally it was broken for me, and since then, life has changed, This all happened for me in 2018, and I can tell you that my life up to 2018 was a tragedy. Tragedy, tragedy, tragedy. Because if you ever look into any Greek tragedy, you will find that it all comes down to the tragic flaw. And the tragic flaw is always something that the tragic hero does not see. And therefore, my whole life, 47 years of my life, was lived as the tragic hero, which is to say, mistake after mistake, disaster after disaster, star-crossed experience after star-crossed experience, misery after misery, And when finally I had the final act of my tragedy, and I was broken open, stopped at last, I could see that all the mistakes, the legion of mistakes that my life was, and really, I am nothing if not a connoisseur of mistakes now, and the texture of what it's like to make mistakes. Anyway, though my life as a tragedy ended at the moment when I became aware of the one mistake that I was making. And as I've said too many times, it's a mistake of authenticity. It doesn't really get to the heart of it because it required a movement of my assemblage point in a deep and fundamental way. And to move it, Carlos, for example, said, at first Don Juan used the power plants, the psychedelics on him, because it's like you do that experience, you are changed, you are different. And used properly, that is a tool to help move you towards enlightenment. And it's no coincidence that all the psychedelics are proving in clinical research to have a very, very effective therapeutic result when it comes to being used properly to help people overcome things like depression and anxiety and PTSD. I'm not going to go into those details. You can research that. It's starting to become common knowledge that proper therapeutic use of psychedelics is the most effective way to help you begin to get better inside. I'm not saying it's the end, it's just a helpful beginning, especially when you're really fucking stuck. So stuck that your life is dysfunctional, And for some poor fucker like me, my life's dysfunction never came to the fore because I was always able to pay my bills and pay my taxes. And so and that's the funny thing about our North American society, is that as long as you're paying your taxes and you've got money, your inner life can go unexamined ultimately because you're doing all the things that are correct. It's only when you fall off the wagon completely are you ever encouraged to examine your life, think about yourself, And in the end of the day, that's what happened to me. It was only when shit completely broke apart that I was able to totally, in acceptance, move freely for the first time. 2018. This is the end of my life as a tragedy. Of course, that was the beginning of my life as a comedy, because my life is a comedy now. I mean, I can't say it all in one go, but things have become really funny. Everything is ironic to me now. Everything is slightly ridiculous. I'm slightly ridiculous to myself. I'm actually more than slightly ridiculous. I'm completely ridiculous to myself. Like if I look at myself prior to 2018, it's like, as someone who has just always been a loving, creatively energetic person, like what was I doing? I was doing nothing more than trying to be a good boy, trying to do the right thing. And doing the right thing was somehow trying to accommodate all of the conditioning that was inside me, that was diverting me and all of my best efforts into the worst possible lifestyle. Self-negating, self-hating, self-loathing, crippled and crippling, So, in these years of my life as a comedy since 2018, I keep looking for a community. And every time I seek community, it's always discordant. It's always marked by dissonance. I must be creating this because it's my life, you know? When I'm playing music, there is no dissonance. When I'm playing music, it's just flow and it's beautiful. And I'm thankful for that because I don't know where I would be without music, you know? And yet even inside of music, you know, the world of musicians is also the world of the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, there's good musicians, there's bad musicians, and then there's the rest of them who are like, they're just pursuing other bizarre agendas with music. And to my ear, it's unpleasant to be around them. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is for me. You know what I mean? And so here I am. This is a gesture, this discipline that I'm practicing with you, strangers, unknown people, and therefore my unknown and the unknowable ultimately, because I don't know what's going to happen here. Maybe nothing, maybe something. Does it matter? What's been valuable is the discipline of being here with you, but that's my value. Part of my gesture, my intent is to create community. You know, I've said in a previous one, you know, I'm talking to you so that you will talk to me. You know what I mean? I want to talk about these topics. I'm interested in spirituality. I'm a loving being. I'm devoted to loving, healing, evolving, dreaming. I'm devoted to dreaming. I'm devoted to living this dream of my life, such as it is. And I'm not going to allow anything to get in the way of the dream that I'm living. That doesn't mean that things are going to go my way. In fact, very little in life seems to go my way. I just get to participate in life according to what feels right to me. And since 2018, the only thing that feels right to me is being loving. And being loving is finally, after years of not knowing what's right and wrong, of knowing what's right and wrong, knowing what's good and bad. I do have a morality, and I always had morals, and yet my morals were part of my value system that I was dislocated from because of my conditioning, which is fucking weird. You know what I mean? It's like this game that I was playing with myself all those years. You know, I'm not playing it any longer, and so my life is no longer a tragedy. I'm laughing at myself, and I'm laughing at other people. You know, other people who technically are in my community. You know what I mean? Like my community, I would say is, well, anyone who's interested in Carlos Castaneda's work. But whenever I look at people, you know, studying Carlos Castaneda's work, I just get these weirdos, the weirdos of the internet. Only the weirdest, most idiosyncratic people ever talk about Carlos Castaneda on the internet. No one is saying anything useful or interesting or valuable. I mean, that's not true. There are some people in the Carlos Castaneda community online who I value. But again, like any other community, the Carlos Castaneda community's got the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, again, every group you ever encounter has got the same. You know what I mean? And what I hate the most is like photo montages where a bunch of Carlos Castaneda's quotes are being spoken by some kind of AI voice over like, you know, a series of images. It's like, what is that? Like, what is going on? Like, what is happening in the internet? What is this thing? This thing which should be, this is evolutionary. The fact that I can sit here in Victoria on Monday morning and just talk to you about my spiritual journey is a fucking miracle. It's a miracle. This technology is miraculous. And if I look at most of what goes on inside of it, I just think, what? What? It doesn't make any sense to me. But then neither does our society and the external world make any sense to me. You know, like for my own mistakes and errors in life, I can say that society has never given me any help whatsoever. In fact, society seems designed to only promote and further the worst parts of ourselves because everything is based on commodification and money, and so it's like there is no value on our society. It just isn't. Like, so if you have any questions inside and your inside is messed up, the outside is also messed up. You know. So here I am. I'm a loving being. I'm a loving man. I'm an energy being, which means my manhood is secondary to like this energy state that's inside me that I feel, and which, as a worker in the mental health and addictions field, I find is the most important piece in terms of being around people who are really broken by their traumas and the things that have happened to them. You know, the most valuable piece is that loving, devotional presence, that non-judgmental presence, that encouraging, flourishing, nourishing abundance that is loving energy. And then, of course, you do have to have some training because, you know, like everyone can be a loving volunteer in a shelter, you know what I mean? And that also is beautifully rewarding work that I have done. And it's reward in itself. Being giving, being loving in that context is a beautiful experience. But when you're in proximity to people whose minds have been broken by traumas and who are trapped in compulsions far beyond the power of their consciousness to get a hold of, that loving, generating, nourishing energy, loving energy must be filtered through training, you know. And I've talked a little bit about the training. You know, I've talked about theoretical model change. I've talked a little bit about motivational interviewing. I've referred to CBT. CBT is a good picture of how the mind works, but I find that as a therapeutic device, means, way of communicating, it's far too limiting because it only talks about the mind. And the mind is such a very small part of our life that if you get someone to understand the limitations of their mental process, that leads them into another area of exploration that CBT has no value in. I find that in the field, CBT is attached. Mindfulness CBT, you know, embodied CBT. CBT's got to get attached to other things to be of any value now, in my opinion. This is why I'm an ACT therapy advocate, which is to say acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a system, a behaviorist system, offshoot, if you will, of CBT and other behavioral ways of looking at human behavior and thinking. Stephen C. Hayes is the author. I advise you to check him out or find that book, see what it's all about. What I love about that system is that the way CBT pictures that emotions, thinking, stuck, circularity, schemas, automatic thinking, broken emotions, trauma-based emotions, right? That whole thing, they call it cognitive fusion. You're fused to your thoughts. You don't realize that you're not your thoughts and the world is not the way you think it is. And the moment you start breaking that fusion, the moment you start defusing yourself from your thinking, you also defuse yourself from the traumatic feelings that are inside of yourself. And that's the beginning of the true journey. And that's where what I love about ACT is that it's never a finished state. It's always an ongoing process. Once you start healing, you are in an ongoing process. There's never an end to healing. Your healing can lead you into other dimensions, right? This is why I, for myself, developed loving, healing, evolving, dreaming, because as I've been healing, I realized that healing is the process which draws you inside. And once you're inside and able to be loving, then life changes its character fundamentally, because you yourself change your character fundamentally. You just have to do it. And I see the evidence in the many clients in the mental health and addiction system that I've come in contact with and had the humbling privilege of being able to be around and to exude my loving grace towards them, you know? Because in a way, that's what healing will do. When you begin authentically healing and you connect within and you find that loving place inside, you come to your grace. And as a very little boy, I had grace. All children have grace. All children are born with grace. All grace means is being loving. All children are born loving. Every child is born loving. And then shit starts happening to us, and we develop this weird attitude towards that, this weird conditioned response to it. And look at this world of 10,000 things that we live in. It's just a shit show of conditioned responses, all in conflict and offense and dissonance all around us, out in the social world, in the internet, any place you might care to look. That's why I'm not naming any names when I'm looking at all these other Carlos Castaneda practitioners who've just launched in their bizarre idiosyncratic abstractions. It's like, I'm glad they're doing it. I'm glad they're shining their light in some kind of generative direction, but I don't feel any resonance there. I don't feel any of that. I just look at it like, God, you sound like someone with a bunch of delusional ideas who I meet in the field. You know what I mean? And at that point, we come down to what is reality, because many clients that I face, the compulsion that holds them in check is a kind of magic realism. In fact, one of the key pieces of schizophrenia spectrum disorders is magical thinking. And magical thinking is also involved in anxiety and OCD disorders, because now I've invoked two very complex topics, schizophrenia spectrum and also anxiety and OCD. The thing is like what we're talking about is compulsive behavior, compulsive patterns of thinking, right? And it's compulsive because of this apprehension on someone's part that they're in a magical reality. And so how we cope with that is what our lives are to a great extent the manifestation of. Because if you start breaking through your conditioning, life is an infinite and infinitely unfolding experience. And I can say that when you're looking at patterns of unconscious behavior, we're just history repeating itself. You meet someone who's struggling with a severe and persistent mental illness, they are caught again and again and again, going through the same thing and the same thing and the same thing, but it seems different to them every time because they can't see that they're stuck inside something which is imprisoning them in a particular worldview, which they think is the world at large, but which they're totally isolated inside of, and they're living in the most lonely place you could imagine. And the thing is looking at the severe pathology of severe and persistent mental illness, it's like, it's no different from what's going on in the rest of society. You know what I mean? Everyone is pursuing their ideas and their ideologies and their ideas. Their conditioned responses are how they live their reality. That's how they're coping with this ever-present living moment. It is to approach it with a stale and repetitive conditioned response. This is what the mind does. This is what the traumas do, which hold us inside when we're not authentic with ourselves. It's just history repeating itself, you know? And a couple of times I've alluded to this when I talk about like, well, I think right now, more than any other time in history, we need to study history because the Western paradigm is collapsing. You know, the actual integral whole core of our Western culture is broken. It's broken. It doesn't persist now. You know, I'm speaking to you as a white man, a white North American man. You know what I mean? Like literally a creature of the absolute privilege of the old paradigm. I apologize. I can't help but to be who I am. You know what I mean? And yet I have experienced, you know, I know I've been born into the privilege, absolutely. But as my life has gone on, it hasn't helped me because the privilege is the conditioned response. And I've never been that person. I'm a human being. I'm an energy being first. If I'm a man, I'm an earth man. If I'm a human being, I'm an energy being. And these are qualities which only the total destruction of my life as a conditioned response, as someone a part of the paradigm, has been the result of. And so now I look at society and it's like, this is just collapse. We're in a state of collapsing right now. Our society is collapsing. And if you want to look at, an example, there's a lot of records of Rome. Look at Rome. Look what happened to Rome. Look at how Rome changed. It was always a military dictatorship. It was always a conquest of violence. And yet for a while, it was a republic. It was a democracy of the males who ran it, because it was, in that world of physical might is right? And Western hegemony is no different. And we're living in the twilight years of the Western and now North American ideology. And it is collapsing, and it will collapse. I am not an apocalyptic Christian. The world is not going to end. The world will go on. Humans are going to go on. But once this system collapses, some other shit is going to rise up. And if you're curious as to what it's going to look like, have a look at what happened to Rome. Personally, I am absolutely turned on to study Roman Britain and how that changed, because it's fascinating. I'll just share a little of my turn on with you. Do you know that Rome invaded Britain just around the time that Jesus was walking around? That's like 50 BC, I think it was. Caesar invaded Britain, and that was just an expeditionary force, right? And then after Jesus' time, it was who was it? Was it Hadrian? No, another of the emperors. Anyway, it's history. Go and investigate it yourself. Another emperor just came in, took it over. England was conquered by Rome, and they went as far almost as Scotland. And Hadrian it was who built the wall, Hadrian's Wall, which I've been to. And going along the wall, I came to this fortress called Vinlandia. And, my friends know this story already. Going to Vinlandia was an absolute, I was spellbound by this place, because it was a fortress at the very edge of the empire. And sometime in the 4th century AD, 400 years, Rome had been in Britain. 400 years. Now, think of the parallel. Europeans first landed in North America in the late 15th century. White people from Europe have been in North America, bringing with their horrible system of slavery and total domination and tyranny for 400 years. So think of our entire history in North America. And in 4th century AD, this is how everyone in Britain considered Britain. Rome was just a fact of life. And then one day, the Roman soldiers who garrisoned this Vinlandia fort, they left. They know this. Archaeology knows this, because it was a very acidic, peat boggy landscape that they lived in. And the day that they left, the day the soldiers went away, they took everything they could carry and threw away everything else. So the ground was littered with papers and books and pants and boots and harnesses and just all the detritus of their life that they couldn't carry. Imagine if you were to leave your life right now and you could only carry what could be put into a big backpack. Think of all the shit in your life that would be left behind. All that was just littered on the ground there, sunk into the bog, perfectly preserved. And if you go to Vinlandia in the north of England, you can see all of these objects of everyday life perfectly preserved, which is a trip and spellbinding in itself. But for me, it was wondering what the local people thought when, after 400 years of domination, suddenly the soldiers were gone. Just gone one day. One day Rome was there. The next day, Rome was gone. That's bizarre. And we're talking about the edge of empire. You know what I mean? The very edge. I mean, Rome collapsed for centuries in Rome. And I mean, it went right in deep into what they call the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, which was basically total collapse of the system and then the rising of all of the local indigenous peoples who just rose up and became something new, you know, and that all went on from there. The reason I find this fascinating is because, I mean, in North America, imagine if like, you know, the police just left your hometown one day. Oh no, it's just too much we're leaving. And the army left. Like, what would happen? It'd be total anarchy, total crisis, total death, total discord, total mayhem, you know, and out of that ferment of misery and suffering, whatever the future is would arise. And we're not at that point yet. But I think that if you study history, you'll see every empire collapses. And this empire is collapsing. Here I am talking about community. I started talking about community, and now I'm just rambling about, you know, the collapse of our society. The thing is that community is the response to the collapse of like a social paradigm. Because in the old paradigm, the only community was what was acceptable within the paradigm. And if you were outside of the paradigm, you were literally marginalized. And, you know, that was that. 100 years ago, people with mental illness were immoral devil worshippers and people who were possessed by spirits, and they were treated very, very harshly. You know, 100 years ago, the local drunk was just someone people laughed at. You know what I mean? And that was that, right? But now we understand that manifestations of mental illness and addiction, the compulsion that drives those behaviors, come from deep-seated traumas, and traumas that are in the family unit, traumas that are in society. And we're troubled by these traumas, and we're empathetic. We should be empathetic to these people because they aren't these people, they're us. They're just us. Like mentally ill people are just who we are, but they're magical people because they live in a magical reality. And the drug-using people that I've met, the euphoria and the experience, their drug experience, whatever their kick is in the substance they're pursuing, there's a magical quality to it, you know? The substance taps them into something which gives them the feeling of being in the magical reality, which, due to their traumas, they don't experience outside of the substance effect. So, again, like, being someone who has been who has been liberated from my conditioning, and trust me, when I say that, it sounds like, you know, it's like an arrogant posture or something. No, it's total destruction of life as I knew it, which has resulted in this experience for me. So it doesn't come without price. You know what I mean? But I live in magical reality now. I have magical thinking. I think magically all the time, every day. Even being here with you, I talk about being in the unknown and being in the unknowable. This is my magic thinking. This is magical thinking. This is the essence of what being magical is recognizing that your thinking is just a limited speck. You put that behind you, then you begin feeling, then you begin realizing that you're going to die, and then what? Life is a mystery. And in that mystery, suddenly the world comes alive in a brand new way, and it is magical, and it is miraculous. And my influence in the healing field, I mean, I have seen people feel better. And for people suffering from severe and persistent mental illness, feeling okay, even if just for a moment, is often the best that we can help them achieve, because they're living in a world conditioned by trauma, reinforced by broken thinking and broken mentality, and sometimes driven to total despairing crisis by voices. You know, perhaps without the trauma, perhaps without the broken thinking, someone who experiences voices might just be a playwright or a novelist, in that they've got characters who are with them. You know what I mean? But because of who they think the voices and the characters are, they live in this terrifying world of paranoid terror, because it's all about, spiritual entities of some kind, beings. And every person you meet who has this phenomenon of voices, they've got their own language and way of understanding what the voices are. If you talk to a novelist or you talk to a playwright, they're going to create dramas. They'll talk to you about their artistic process, right? Someone with a schizophrenia spectrum disorder can't really talk about their process. They just tell you who the people are and why they listen to them and how they're affecting them. And then, and then what, right? You're sitting with a person, and it can sometimes feel like you're sitting with like multiple people, depending on, how the person is experiencing what they're going through, right? So as a community, there is no real community. It's a community of completely isolated individuals, the community of people suffered from severe and persistent mental illness, Equally, addicts, if addicts are in recovery, that can be a community, because they're in a community allied with the experience of something that they have no power over, which is the compulsion of their addiction, and this is where the concept of a peer comes in. Peers are vital in recovery, because sometimes if you feel that you're trapped and imprisoned and you can't get out, you need an example, someone who's going, I hear you, brother, this shit is off the hook, but you can do it. I can do it, you can do it. You know what I mean? And I consider myself a peer. I consider myself a peer to anyone who is trying to heal. And when I say heal, this is another distinction I think is important. When I say healing, if you start healing, that's the same thing as saying learning. After 47 years, I started truly learning, which is to say, learning from a place of loving acceptance within. Until we are in a state of loving acceptance within and awareness of our own mortality, like learning is just secondary to our conditioning. And then it just becomes a creature of the mind and may have some value, but ultimately goes nowhere, because it's a stale repetition of history, trauma history. That's all it will ever be, right? That's why our society is collapsing, because it's just history repeating itself. I think each one of us on the internet here is doing our part to shine a new way, which is we're all making this shit up as we go along. We can create this life any way we want to create it, and we have to. We have to do it, because if we don't do it, no one is going to. Society isn't out there. Society is in here. Society is in our loving gesture. And if we come to loving gesture inside ourselves, we transform the world around us. And ultimately, that's why I'm here, is because this is my discipline, getting to my loving place, getting to my awareness of mortality, and offering it to you, to the unknown and ultimately the unknowable forces of the world, is my part of this. This is all I can do now. This is all I can do, because everything else that I touched when I was younger was just history repeating itself. So I just lived the tragedy of history repeating itself. And and earlier I was laughing at some of the more esoteric versions of people who I watch and listen to, trying to find some kind of community in warriorhood and in striving to be a man of knowledge, and these aspects of Carlos Castaneda's teaching. And it just looks like history repeating itself. I don't know what to say, and yet that's just my judgment because I don't know these people, and I haven't met them in the room, and I haven't experienced what they've got to give. You know what I mean? And there's the limitation of the internet. It's just a surface, as I've said before. How can I try to create a community here when this is just the shallow surface of what I'm doing out here in the world of light and life? This internet connects us together in a magical and mystical way, which feels to me like the power of evolution, because even our nervous system, the spine, this thing of the chakras and the energies, where the assemblage point is inside us, the middle point, this place where a loving being resides, the energy centers down in your belly, whether it's gut intelligence or head intelligence. I'm just throwing out terms I've heard from all over the place, right? But this magic realm of energy, which is also the material reality of this body that we're living in, this spine, this energy, this nervous system, you know what I mean? This is the creation, the corporate creation that cells made hundreds of millions of years ago. So who's to say this body that I'm in right now and that you're in right now is anything more than another single corporate cellular identity that because of this internet we're now coming together in patterns of behavior that are going to become some new entity in the future. It's going to be vastly beyond our scope. It's going to explore outer space. Space is the new ocean. It is our ocean. It is what Castaneda and his practitioners, the Toltec practitioners, call the dark sea of awareness. That's a beautiful concept to me, the dark sea of awareness. I think that the cells, the single-celled organisms, hundreds of millions of years ago, I think they are aware of the dark sea of awareness. This was for them the oceans of the earth, and they made bodies, they made us to explore it. And we've explored our earth in its totality. And human beings seem to be the masters of this earth, and bad masters we are at the moment, denigrating the environment, denigrating nature, acting as Joe Rogan says, like the earth is a piece of bread and we're just the mold on it, just compulsively consuming the whole thing until it's gone, and then we'll be gone. I mean, powerful to think of human beings as mold, because we think about our intelligence and our awareness and our spiritual consciousness, which does seem to me to feel to be the evolutionary next step here, right? And yet, from a certain vaster, perhaps galactic perspective, mold on a bread maybe, just eating up the bread until there's no bread left, and then what? Mass death and destruction, you know what I mean? A sad indictment. And yet look at our society. Who is behind this? Who is behind this endless, wanton commodification of this world and of people? Even in mental health and addictions, people's healing is secondary to just loading them with medications and making sure that they can just live in a house somewhere and not make any troubles for society, which is a mandate that I accept. We don't want people breaking laws, we don't want people freaking out, and disturbing people. But the thing is that disturbing what? Disturbing the status quo, disturbing this corporate, predatory, 1% serving commodification. It's just like anywhere you turn, there's addiction in this society, We stigmatize addicts, but no one realizes their own compulsions. No one's looking at their own compulsions and their own stuckness. I think as a worker in mental health and addictions, my value is in that I'm aware of my own stuckness. I'm on my own journey. I call it a healing journey. It's also a learning journey. Learning because I am in something that I don't understand. And our society doesn't understand it. And its lack of understanding is its end, because it is collapsing. It is history repeating itself. So how do we stop being history repeating itself? How do we do it? All I know is the individual way, which is to realize your conditioning and then seek to live outside of its hollow imperative. And that's the only place to be. And so, community. I don't know what to say. I'm trying to create community here. I'm trying to offer this to you and say, think about it. Find your own way. I'm finding my way, and my way needs this. I need to give you this in order to keep it alive inside myself. The giving is the being. The giving is the essence of what any community experience is. This is what I'm giving to you. What are you giving to others? It's a question I want to leave you with today. And really the question of community, the question of community. How can we have a community where we are all living a dream? We're all living our own dreams. How can we live our own dreams? What's our communal dream? What dream are we living for? I don't think we're living a dream right now. I don't think anyone is really living a dream. I go out there and I talk to people. No one is really living their dream. No one has any connection to dream life, which is to say, not fantasy. No one has any connection to energy life, to living, loving, life force, dreaming reality. No one is doing it. Instead, what we get is the shallow, vended fantasies of the very, very rich who want to prolong their richness. And even that, it sounds like it's a cabal of like rich people perpetrating a great conspiracy, on the rest of us, and maybe it is, but it feels deeper. It's like a guiding ideology, and until we unhook from our ideologies and live from a place of being human, being energy, being alive, being earth beings, I don't know. I don't know what to say, but this is my gesture towards community today. Loving, awareness of mortality, giving what feels right to me. And that is magical and mystical and unknowable. And yet I say unknowable, I need that discipline, just like death. Death is discipline to me. Death is to say, I could die today. I could be dying right now. I am dying right now, but it might be over in an instant. If an earthquake hits, this building is going to collapse on me, and that's going to be that. You know what I mean? And I mean, it sounds ridiculous and fanciful, but who knows what's going to happen? You never know when death is coming. So what does this moment mean? Death is a way of helping you realize this moment, the importance of this moment, the importance of it. And when you start having that feeling, is life just going to repeat itself? Which in my case, returned to nothing more than trauma-based conditioning, which was just a tragedy, an ever repetitious tragedy of history repeating itself. Or when death wakes you up to the importance of this moment, can you realize that this is an endlessly unfolding infinity of intelligence that we're inside of? That's not limited to our minds and our mental process. In fact, our mental process has got nothing to do with it. Our mental process is like a passenger. It's a passenger in this journey. And as a passenger, it can talk about what's going on, but it is not what is going on. The journey is something that our energy, our aliveness is moving. And the only way we can access that is by being loving inside. And this is what community must begin in my view. And so, as always, at the end of these things, because I'm at the end now, obviously, this is the longest one I've done so far, community, it's like, all I have is questions. All I have is an open-ended gesture. Community. What is it? How can we make it? How can we share a dream together? How can we live dreams that are somehow going to blend together and make a single beautiful dream that we can all live into the future on this earth of total abundance? All of us can be wealthy right now. Wealthy in all the ways that are meaningful. But we're not. It's just a rat race of history repeating itself. So what is community? That's my question to you. Community. I'm going to leave that open-ended. because I don't have any answers. I know my dream, and I'm going to continue on as we go along here with more of it, more of what I'm dreaming and what I'm feeling. But at the end of the day, you out there, the unknown people who may eventually read this or hear it, I should say, sorry, you know, it's like, what is community? What can we do to create this oneness? How can we have oneness in this infinite diversity of individuals and individuation? It's possible. It's possible because we are all earth people first. We all feel love first. We're all going to die. These are commonalities that are the basis of true community, in my view. And this is the beginning of that, I hope. And in that spirit, I wish you well today, and be disciplined and keep reaching. Keep reaching.